I stood there in the wind, clutching a briefcase that felt heavier than a bag of concrete, watching the morning sun hit the glass facade of the Boulder County Justice Center, and all I could think about was how quiet it gets right before a structural failure. You know that sound? That groan of steel before the snap? That's what silence sounded like inside my head. I let a homeowners association build 480 luxury homes on my land. And I didn't scream. I didn't chain myself to a bulldozer. I didn't even write a letter when they started carving up the mountain that my grandfather, Arthur Thorne, bought with blood money from Vietnam back in 1971. They called me a trespasser. They called the cops. Their president looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing but a nuisance. And today, I was walking into a courtroom to introduce them to the only thing that matters in this country when the shouting stops: the deed. My name is Mason Thorne. I'm a 50-something civil engineer who spent his life calculating load-bearing walls, but I never calculated I'd be the guy pulling the pin on the biggest real estate grenade in state history. It started with a promise, the kind you make to a dying man when the morphine is dripping and the room smells like antiseptic and old memories. Arthur left me 350 acres of raw, jagged timberland up in Silver Creek, a place where the air is so thin it makes you dizzy and the silence is so deep it feels like church. He kept everything in these old, cracked leather binders, receipts from the 70s, hand-drawn surveys, and that deed, stamped and signed, with a note that just said, "Mason, don't let the wolves take the mountain." I failed him, at least I thought I did. Because life has a way of burying you under divorces and 60-hour work weeks and the kind of exhaustion that makes 5 years blink by like 5 minutes. I paid the taxes every single spring, never missed a dime, sending checks from my lonely apartment in Denver, thinking the land was sitting there waiting for me, timeless and untouched. It wasn't until my daughter, Lily, asked about scattering Arthur's ashes that I finally packed the truck, grabbed a thermos of black coffee, and drove up that winding canyon road, expecting to see pine trees and dirt tracks. What I saw instead nearly stopped my heart. The old fire road was gone, buried under 6 inches of fresh, black asphalt, wide enough to land a plane on, lined with perfectly manicured non-native shrubs and a massive, limestone monument sign that screamed Summit View Estates. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, staring at this kingdom that had popped up out of nowhere, a guard shack that looked like a fortress, cameras swiveling, flags snapping in the wind. I drove past the sign, past the banners advertising mountain luxury starting at $1.2 million, and I crested the ridge where Arthur used to smoke his pipe and watch the hawks circle. My stomach dropped through the floorboard. Valley to ridge, it was gone, all of it, replaced by a sprawling infection of cul-de-sacs, beige stucco, shimmering pools, and roof lines that went on forever. 480 houses. My land had been colonized. I rolled down to the gatehouse, my brain trying to process the impossibility of it, and that's when I met her, the woman who would become the architect of her own destruction, Elena Vance. She was standing there by the gate, looking like she'd just stepped out of a catalog for people who think money is a personality trait, holding a clipboard like a weapon. The security guard, a kid who looked like he failed the police academy entrance exam twice, tried to wave me off, telling me this was a private community, but I just stared at him, calm, terrifyingly calm. Elena stepped up, sunglasses perched on her head, giving me that look. You know the one. The look that says you don't belong in my tax bracket. She asked if I was lost, asked if I needed directions back to the highway. I'm not lost, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, gravelly and low. I'm just admiring the view. She smirked, a tight, practiced expression. Well, unless you're a resident of Summit View, you're trespassing, so turn that truck around before I have security escort you out. I reached over to the passenger seat, grabbed the leather folder containing Arthur's original deed, and stepped out of the truck. The guard flinched, hand going to his belt, but Elena just sighed, bored. I walked right past them, right under the raised barrier arm, and headed for the sales office, a glass box sitting right where my grandfather's cabin used to be. Elena came clicking after me, heels snapping on the pavement, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. We went into the office, air-conditioned to freezing, smelling of lavender and greed. I threw the folder on the glass table. My name is Mason Thorne, I said, and you built your little kingdom on my dirt. She laughed. She actually laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. She told me I was confused, told me the developer, Sterling Vance, her husband, had annexed this land years ago, told me to take my sentimental scrapbook and get out before she sued me for harassment. She called the sheriff, she called me crazy, but then the guard, the kid, he pulls up the county map on his iPad, trying to be helpful, and his face goes pale. "Ms. Vance," he whispers, "the parcel ID for this office, it's not coming up." She froze. For a second, just a second, I saw the fear behind the Botox, but she buried it quick. She kicked me out, told me never to come back. I drove to a motel in the next town over, shaking, not from fear, but from rage, the kind of cold, quiet rage that burns for years. That night, a guy knocked on my motel door, big guy, dead eyes, said he worked for Summit View, told me that Mr. Vance prefers quiet resolutions, and handed me a card for a lawyer, implying that if I didn't take a payout, things would get loud. That was their mistake. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They didn't know they were dealing with a structural engineer who knows that if you want to bring down a building, you don't attack the walls, you attack the foundation. I called Evelyn Sharp. She was a legend in land disputes, a chain-smoking attorney who operated out of a brick office in downtown Denver that smelled like old paper and justice. I sat across from her the next morning, showed her the deed, the lack of sale records, the forged signatures on the county website that looked like a child had scrawled my name. She looked at the map, then at me, her eyes gleaming like a predator spotting a limp. "They forged the title chain," she said, smoke curling from her lips. "They created a ghost parcel, Mason. This isn't just trespassing. This is grand larceny on an industrial scale." "So we stop them?" I asked. "We file an injunction today?" Evelyn shook her head, and this is the moment the trap was set. "No. If we stop them now, they claim it was a clerical error. They file bankruptcy, the LLC dissolves, and they walk away with the cash they've already made. We don't stop them, Mason. We let them finish. We let them sell every single house. We let them dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. It's called RICO, racketeering. But you have to wait. Can you do that? Can you watch them steal your inheritance for another year and do nothing?" I thought about Arthur. I thought about the wolves. "Let's burn it down," I said. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow-motion torture that lasted 18 months. I had to become a ghost in my own life, driving up to the public ridges overlooking Summit View estates, watching the bulldozers tear into the earth, watching the framing go up, watching families move in with their U-Hauls and their dreams, completely unaware they were buying stolen property. It was nauseating. Elena Vance and her husband Sterling didn't make it easy. They launched a campaign to destroy me. It started on the neighborhood Facebook groups, photos of my truck parked legally on the county road, captions like "suspicious individual watching our kids," or "police have been notified about the stalker." They painted me as a creep, a deranged ex-owner who couldn't let go. I lost friends. My own ex-wife called and told me to get therapy. I couldn't tell anyone the plan. I had to eat the shame, swallow it whole, and keep documenting. I bought a long lens camera. I documented every phase. Phase 1, complete. Phase 2, complete. The infrastructure, the sewage lines connecting to the city grid illegally, the power poles, I cataloged it all. Evelyn was in the background, quietly building a dossier that was thicker than a phone book, tracing the money, the shell companies, the bribes paid to county clerks to look the other way. Then, the final house sold. Lot 480. A nice young couple with a golden retriever. I watched them sign the papers on the porch, shaking Sterling Vance's hand. The trap was shut. The crime was consummated. That night, my phone pinged. An anonymous email. Subject: "You need to hear this." Attached was a voice memo and a cache of internal documents from Vance Global Holdings. A whistleblower. I put my headphones on, sitting in the dark of my apartment, and pressed play. It was a boardroom meeting. I heard Sterling's voice, smooth as silk and twice as slippery. "Look, the Thorn issue is a nuisance, not a threat," Sterling was saying on the recording. "The old man doesn't have the funds to fight us. By the time the courts figure out the title overlap, we'll have liquidated the LLC and moved the assets to the Cayman accounts. Possession is 9/10 of the law. We build, we sell, we vanish. It's free money." Then Elena's voice, dripping with venom. "He's just a sad old man. I'll file another restraining order if he parks on the ridge again. Just keep building." They knew. They weren't negligent. They were predators. They had looked at my grandfather's legacy and saw a line item on a balance sheet. I forwarded everything to Evelyn. She called me back 10 seconds later. "This is it, Mason. This is the nuke. Get your suit ready. We're going to war." The next morning, the dominoes started to fall, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I drove out to Summit View, but this time, I wasn't alone. A convoy of city vehicles, county inspectors, and a federal marshal pulled up to the main gate. The red tags started going up. Stop work order, federal investigation, title dispute. Elena came running out of the sales office, screaming like a banshee, waving permits that we now knew were fake. She saw me sitting in my truck, window rolled down, just watching. She stormed over, her face twisted into something ugly. "You did this," she shrieked. "You think you can stop us? We have lawyers who cost more than your life is worth. I'll ruin you, Thorne." I didn't say anything. I just pointed to the federal marshal who was currently zip-tying a seizure notice to her Mercedes. Then Sterling showed up. He tried to play it cool, walking over to the property line where I was parked on the public road. He was sweating, though. The confident tycoon was cracking. "Look, Mason," he said, trying to flash that $1 million smile. "Let's be reasonable. We can settle this. $500,000? Cash. Today." I looked at him, really looked at him. "You built 480 homes on land you don't own, Sterling." "It's a misunderstanding," he stammered. "We can fix the paperwork." "You can't fix a felony with paperwork," I said. "And I don't want your money. I want the truth." The desperation in his eyes was palpable. He realized right then that I wasn't playing his game. I wasn't holding out for a better price. I was holding out for his head on a platter. By the time the sun went down, the accounts of Summit View estates were frozen. The banks, realizing they held mortgages on stolen land, panicked. The investors, realizing they'd been defrauded, pulled their funding. The machine ground to a halt. The silence returned to the ridge, but this time, it wasn't the silence of submission. It was the silence of a held breath before the execution. The courtroom was packed. Every pew was filled with homeowners, terrified families who had sunk their life savings into houses that legally didn't exist. Reporters lined the back walls. Judge Holloway sat on the bench, a woman with eyes like flint and zero patience for nonsense. Evelyn Sharp was surgical. She didn't yell, she didn't grandstand. She just laid out the timeline. The 1971 deed. The forged transfer in 2018. The lack of payment. And then, she put Elena Vance on the stand. Elena tried to keep up the act, tried to claim ignorance, but Evelyn picked her apart piece by piece. She showed the Facebook posts where Elena admitted to knowing I claimed ownership, but dismissed it as senility. She showed the emails. And then, she played the recording. The sound of Sterling Vance laughing about free money and liquidating assets echoed off the mahogany walls. The courtroom gasped. I saw a woman in the front row, holding a baby, put her hand over her mouth and start to cry. Sterling, sitting at the defense table, put his head in his hands. Elena looked like she was going to vomit. Judge Holloway stared at the defendants for a long, uncomfortable minute. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "In 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a case of fraud this brazen. You didn't just steal land. You stole the security of nearly 500 families. You treated the law as a suggestion." She turned to me. "Mr. Thorne, the court finds in your favor. The title is yours. The improvements on the land are yours. Legally, you have the right to evict every single person in Summit View Estates and bulldoze the structures." The room went dead silent. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The fear was thick enough to taste. This was it. The revenge I had dreamed of. I could wipe Summit View off the map. I could restore Arthur's Mountain. I stood up. I walked to the microphone. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the weight of the moment. I looked at Sterling and Elena, broke and defeated, facing federal prison time. Then I looked at the families. "My grandfather," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "bought this land to find peace. He told me not to let the wolves take it. Well, the wolves are gone." I pointed at the defense table. "But you folks, you aren't wolves. You're victims, just like me." I took a deep breath. "I'm not evicting anyone. I'm placing the land into a permanent community land trust. You keep your homes. You pay your mortgages, but not to Vance. The HOA is dissolved effective immediately. No more fees, no more rules, no more Elena. The undeveloped acreage stays wild, forever. It belongs to the trust. It belongs to us. The sound that erupted wasn't applause. It was a sob of relief from hundreds of people at once. I saw Elena staring at me, confused. She couldn't understand it. In her world, you take everything you can. In my world, you do what's right. The aftermath was swift. The Vances went to prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. Evelyn and I set up the Thorn Wilderness Trust. And a week later, I went back up to the ridge. It was dusk. The lights of the houses were flickering on below, warm and golden. It wasn't the wild forest my grandfather knew, but it was a community now, a real one, free from the rot that built it. I took the canister of ashes out of my bag. I walked to the edge of the cliff, where the wind comes rushing up from the valley floor. You were right, Arthur, I whispered. Trees don't lie. Men do. But sometimes, men can fix it. I scattered the ashes into the wind, watching them swirl and disappear into the twilight. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the weight of the suit or the court or the years of fighting. I just felt light. So, here's the question I leave you with, and I want you to really think about it before you comment. I had the legal right to destroy everything they built. I could have bulldozed those homes and returned the land to nature, which is what my grandfather probably would have wanted. Did I do the right thing by letting the families stay, effectively accepting the scar on the mountain? Or does true justice mean erasing the crime completely, no matter the collateral damage? Tell me below. Because even now, standing on this ridge, I'm still asking myself the same thing.